Once upon a time, in a humble village, there lived two best friends named Mike and Joe. They were as close as brothers, bound not only by their shared hustle, but by their loyalty and trust in one another. Life in the village was hard, and both Mike and Joe struggled to make ends meet. To survive, they worked tirelessly, moving from farm to farm, harvesting crops, weeding fields, and carrying heavy load for the wealthier landowners. Though they barely earned enough to buy food, they always shared whatever little they had. Their friendship was a shining light in the hardships they faced. Despite their poverty, Mike was always cheerful, even though he had an extra burden, which was his aged and frail mother. She could no longer work and always sick, and Mike had to care for her as her only child and surviving family member, cooking meals, fetching water, and making sure she was comfortable. Though the responsibility weighed heavily on him, Mike never complained, for he loved his mother dearly. Joe, on the other hand, is somewhat fortunate to not have any dependent, and so he was looking out solely for himself. He often dreamed of a better life beyond the village. He longed to leave the fields behind and find opportunities in the bustling towns where, he believed, fortune awaited him. One evening, as the two friends sat beneath a palm tree after a long day's work, Joe turned to Mike with a serious look. "Mike, I've been thinking. We can't keep living like this, slaving away for pennies while others grow rich. I've heard that in the towns beyond the mountains, there's real opportunity. People say the merchants and traders, they're always looking for help, and they pay well, much better than we can ever earn here. Look out there, Mike. I want us to go try our luck." Mike looked at his friend, his heart torn. "But, Joe, I can't leave," he said quietly. "My mother needs me. I'm the only family she has. She's old and sick, and I can't abandon her. I wish things were different." Joe nodded. "I know, Mike, but what if I go first? I could send back money. I could build a new life for both of us, and one day, when I get her a home nurse and your mother is taken care of, you could join me. You'll never have to work in the fields again." Mike smiled at the idea. He trusted his friend so much and prayed silently that things would work out as they're projecting. "Thank you, my friend, for including me in your plans. It sounds very promising," Mike said. And they both laughed happily, but suddenly, Joe's laughter turned into a cold sigh. There was one problem. Joe didn't have enough money to travel and start new. Sensing his friend's worries, Mike spoke again. "What is the matter?" "Mike, I need your help. I don't have enough money to make the journey. If you could lend me what you have, I'll be able to leave and set things in motion. I promise, once I make it big, I'll return. We'll be rich, and I'll repay you 10 times over." Joe pleaded. Mike trusted Joe like a brother. Despite his own needs and the little he is saving for his mother, he decided to lend Joe almost all his money. "I trust you, Joe," he said, handing him the coins he had worked so hard for. "Don't forget about us when you're successful." They shook hands and went back into their separate homes, feeling hopeful. In a few days' time, Joe left the village, filled with hope and ambition. He promised to return soon, with riches beyond their dreams, and Mike bid him farewell with teary eyes. Joe arrived at the big town of Choba and was overwhelmed by the sight. He settled into a shelter and found his way to the busy streets to offer his services and seek the fortunes of the land. He got lucky after some weeks when he met a wealthy cotton trader who employed him in his processing factory. He worked very hard for his coin and gained his master's trust. He got promoted in a year, and the god of luck kept smiling down at him. The years passed, and while Mike toiled in the fields and cared for his sick mother, news reached the village that Joe had indeed made it big. He had become a wealthy trader in a distant town, buying and selling goods from across the land. People said he had a grand house with servants, and he was dressed in the finest clothes. Mike was overjoyed to hear of his friend's success and eagerly awaited Joe's return. One day, after several years, Joe finally came back to the village. But something had changed. Instead of seeking out his old friend, Joe settled into a grand new house he had built at the edge of the village. He held lavish feasts for the wealthy and powerful elites, but he avoided the poor villagers he had once worked alongside. He didn't even visit Mike, the friend who had encouraged and supported him in his time of need. Mike waited for his friend after news of his return spread like wildfire throughout the village, but he didn't come, and so he decided to go see Joe, excited to be reunited. He was shocked by what he met. Joe was no longer the humble, hard-working friend he had once known. He had grown proud, arrogant, and cold. "Joe," Mike called as he approached Joe's grand house. But Joe barely glanced at him, his face hardening. with indifference. "Mike, I don't have time for you at the moment. I'm busy with important matters now," Joe said dismissively as he entertained the rich landowners in his compound. Mike was heartbroken. He couldn't believe the friend he had once trusted with everything could turn his back on him. Joe had forgotten the years they had spent together, struggling side by side. He had forgotten that Mike had given him all the money he had so he could build a better life. But Mike, being a gentle soul, said nothing. He returned to his small, humble home, taking care of his mother as always, and continued to work in the fields. Months passed, and Joe's arrogance grew. He flaunted his wealth, scorned the villagers, and turned away from his past. But fate, as it often does, had plans to humble him. One day, a powerful merchant called I.B. from a neighboring town who was jealous of Joe accused him of cheating him in a trade. The accusation spread quickly, and soon, other traders turned against Joe, refusing to do business with him. Joe's wealth began to crumble. In desperation, he sought help from those wealthy traders he wined and dined with, and they all turned their backs on him. He sought help from the other townsmen who had once admired him, but they equally turned their backs, just as he had turned his back on his village. With his reputation ruined and his fortune dwindling, Joe found himself in a dire situation. He was on the verge of losing everything. In his darkest moment, he realized that his wealth did not attract any good friend, and he has lost the ones who were genuine as a result of his arrogance. He locked himself in his house in shame, losing to his ill fate. Mike heard about the misfortune that had befallen his friend and was moved with great pity and concern. The merchant I.B. who accused his friend Joe is a longtime client. He clears his fields every planting season, and so he decided to get to the root of the matter. Upon investigation, Mike overheard I.B. and his friends at the Palm Wine Bar celebrating and discussing the downfall of Joe, and they talked loudly of how they spread lies about him to make him lose his reputation and eventually his wealth. Mike was unhappy about this and reported his findings to the king. "They're accusing my friend wrongly, and he will lose everything he worked for if his name is not cleared," Mike pleaded to the king. The king was moved by his pleas and sent out his royal spy to investigate further. After some weeks, the king summoned Joe and the merchant to the town's court. The king publicly announced to the crowd that Joe is innocent of all accusations of swindling and cheating. The king further announced that Mike and his royal spy had investigated and gathered evidence to prove this. The crowd went numb in shock, and I.B. the merchant bowed his head in shame. Joe's eyes welled up in tears as he looked over. How could he help me even after all I did to him? He felt so ashamed of his behavior. He fell on his knees to apologize to Mike. Mike embraced his friend Joe into a tight hug, and they both shed tears. "I have wronged you, my friend. Please forgive me. I let my fortune take away my conscience." Joe wept uncontrollably. "I do not resent you or my brother," Mike responded as the crowd cheered happily. The merchant was punished severely for spreading lies against an honest man out of spite. Joe took Mike to his house, determined to fulfill all his promises and most importantly rebuild their friendship. In the end, Joe learned a valuable lesson. That wealth is fleeting, but true friendship is priceless. From that day on, Joe and Mike worked and flourished together, just as they had in the old days, but this time not just for survival, but to lift each other up. Their story lived on as a lesson to the villagers and to all who heard it. Wealth may fade, but the heart that holds love and humility will always endure.